We should start. Okay, Ji. So today's session is on behavioral economics. So let me first share a few slides that I've prepared. So today we are going to talk about behavioral economics. It is relatively a new field in the field of economics, a new addition and very interesting and exciting with very interesting insights. So today what we are going to do in this 1 hour almost, and then almost I will take 40 to 50 minutes, and then we can have question and answer. And we'll start with the behavioral economics. What do you mean by behavioral economics? And then important question is that how it is different from traditional economics. So all the economic thoughts and ideas that we have covered up till now, they were bracketed under the traditional economics, and how behavioral economics is different. And then again, as the course is focused on the intellectual history of ideas, so we'll see what are the main characters who played an influential role in bringing these insight primarily from psychology into economics. And then we'll look at some of the policy implications, although it's a very broad areas where these things can apply, but we'll focus more on development side and briefly on finance. And finally, I will add up in the last, we'll show you the resources, the books and important things that you can further, if you want to explore these ideas. So that, and this whole presentation is also based on the ideas from those resources. So those resources are at the end. But once we get to know. Now, let's look at starting. First thing is that there are many branches of economics. First, we look at economics from micro and macro dimensions. Then we also have, for example, labor economics, international economics, financial economics, and even environmental economics. So these are all different branches of economics, you can say. But I think the behavioral economics is, in a sense, fundamentally different from that, because it challenged the fundamental ideas and assumption about the human behavior. So in a sense, it's a broad departure rather than an underlying application of the traditional microeconomic model into different dimensions, like, as I said, labor, international economics, and so on. What happened that before we get into the behavioral, we have to see how economists traditionally look at human beings. So economists traditionally conceptualized a world populated by calculating unemotional maximizer that have been dubbed as Homo Economicus. So the idea is, whenever we look at any economic theory or model, there's an underlying assumption about the human behavior, that what we be, because the idea is, and we believe that underlying human is what we call rational, and he's focused on maximizing utility. And it is like, just think of it on a very crude terms. The human beings are conceptualized as a calculating machines like computers. And what makes humans being different, that human beings have emotions, and there are psychological things which are different with humans than machine. But for somehow economists assume, and there is a reason for that. The first thing is, when you assume that people are rational, then it is relatively easy to model them. So economists love to model. What does model? Model, as we discussed earlier, models are like maps. They are the simplified version of reality. So in reality, human beings are complex, messy. In a sense, their decision making is very complex. It is very difficult to say that how people behave in a particular situation. So one easy solution that economists come up with, to assume that they are rational, because once you assume that human beings are rational, that means you can model them. Then you can say something about them. Otherwise, if we go, and most of the economic laws and theories and models are generalized, because we want to generalize the behavior. So even individually, if there are some eccentric behavior, we focus on general behavior. And in order to say something about the general behavior, this is the assumption that we take, that people are rational. And we'll talk about rationality in a minute as well. But first, let's look at behavioral economics. In simple words, it's the branch of economics, as I said, a recent addition into the branch of economics, which primarily takes ideas from psychology and put it into economic models and in economic behavior. And this is also interesting because when we take ideas from across discipline, they bring new insight. So behavioral economics itself is a manifestation of this idea that how much it is important to integrate ideas from different disciplines. Because sometimes, like if you look at the case of economists, what economists believe, or what they assume at least in economic model about the behavior of human behavior. If you talk with any psychologist, they could not believe that economists build their whole world, their whole models based on this very very simplified notion of human behavior. Because psychologists have studied human behavior, emotions, cognition, social behavior, other things in more detail. So they have a much richer understanding of how people actually behave. So as someone said that in behavioral economics, we study how people should behave. That means that, how they should behave if they are rational. But in behavioral economics, we will look at how they actually behave. So in reality, how people are behaving. So we are going from abstract assumptions of rational behavior and trying to incorporate, keeping in view the insight from psychology, that how people actually behave. And that actually is really important, in a sense, insight, and that gives birth to this new branch in economics. So in standard economic model, there are three underlying assumptions, which are unrealistic traits. One is the unbounded rationality. The economic agent is rational and it is unbounded, like it is fully rational. Unbounded willpower and unbounded selfishness. So whatever people do, they based on underlying these three, which are actually unrealistic traits. And all of these, basic, just wait for a few seconds. Azan is going on, and that might be difficult to hear. Okay, so these are three unrealistic traits, and we'll look at them one by one. But before that, if you go back to any ideas in economics, and that's the power of ideas, most of them, if not all of them, goes back to Adam Smith. Like Adam Smith wrote not only The Wealth of Nation, which is the famous, his famous work in 1776, but much before that, in 1759, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiment, and in which he actually talked a lot about the mental and emotional underpinning of human interactions, including economic interactions. So he actually talked about the role of emotions and other psychological factors, that how they play out in economic interaction. But later on in economics, as I said earlier, because in order to mathematically model the human behavior. It was more easy or logical to confine it into the realm of rationality, because then it is more predictable behavior, because then we assume that people are rational, their preferences are stable across time, and then we can model their behavior. But if you look at the theory of model sentiment, so there are lots of things there which indicate that Smith believed, and that how human psychological factors undermine their economic interactions. And then fast forward later on, Keynes also has this insight and what he called in his journal theory, the animal spirit. Now, Keynes, as we discussed earlier in more detail, Keynes is a very interesting character. He's not like an Ivy League academician. He was a policymaker, he was an investor, he managed the fund for King's College as well. So in a sense, so he knew how the markets works. He practiced in the market. He made a lot of money. He lost a lot of money. He was also buying. He purchased even arts at a very good, prices, reasonable prices later on, which become very highly valuable. So he made money, lost money. So in a sense, he understands the role of psychological factors. So he used this term called animal spirit, that in stock market, and not only in stock market, but also later on in his work for investment and consumption behavior, he actually underlines, he touched this area that this animal, people have this kind of animal spirit, and when they do things which are sometimes crazy, or you can call them irrational, based on emotional underpinnings. So these are something that we can find in the work of Keynes, but properly in a formulated way, the first time in a sense, someone who highlighted the limitations of traditional model was Herbert Simon. He later won the Nobel Prize. So in 1955, he was the early critic of this idea of unlimited information processing capabilities. So we are not like computers, which is quite logical from a psychological point of view, that when we take information and when we make any economic decision, we don't work like an Excel file and list all the pros and cons of any decisions, and then we don't have this thing to assign probabilities and putting up utilities, and then we maximize the utility. That is not the case. So he was the first one who come up with this idea of bounded rationality. He says that yes, humans are not crazy or stupid in that matter. They are rational, but the rationality is bounded. So he was the first one who, in a sense, formulated this idea that this is more realistic conception of human being, is that our rationality is bounded. So it is limited in a way. So it's something that we need to consider. So this idea that people are unboundedly rational is might not be the case. And rationality is again is a complex topic, and in philosophy, philosopher has been dealing with this idea of rationality. But for our case in economics, when we use the word rationality, means that human agents, economic agents are looking at, whenever they make decision, they look at cost benefit analysis, they look at what is good for them, bad for them, and they do computation, calculation. And secondly, self-interest is the primary driver, and they have a stable preferences. So over the period, their preferences are stable. It's not like today you say something, tomorrow you change your point of view, although humans do change their point of view even on a daily basis. But in order to model it, we assume this thing. So in rationality, in our case, is you can say cost-benefit analysis, looking at what is good for the economics, and they will do that. So now let's move forward and see that what are the problems with this underlying assumption. Unbounded willpower. Again, this is quite obvious. Even if you look at the self-help section of any bookshop, you'll see dozens of books. I don't know whether they work or not, but they all talk about that willpower is limited. So we cannot rely on willpower to do things. So we need to do things which are good for us, but we don't do it because of, like, it's not like we have a kind of willpower, we can do whatever is good for us, so which we assume in economics. So in reality, people are doing things which they realize, they understand that it's not good for them, like bad habits, bad eating habits, or not doing exercise, or any kind of these things. And a New Year resolution, people try to overcome many of their problems, and sometimes they succeed, but many a time they fail. Why? Because changing habits, making habits is really tricky. And human beings, even when they know that something is good for them, that does not necessarily means that they are going to practice that thing. So we have this problem of willpower. So we don't have an unbounded willpower in reality. Even unbounded selfishness is not there. So we see people have altruistic behavior. People give, even in a country like Pakistan, people give tons of money in different kinds of charity. They do volunteer work, because if we focus only on this narrow sense of selfishness, then we cannot explain this thing. Now, in experimental economics, there is a very famous simple experiment called ultimatum game, in which, for example, here is the in which a proposer of the experiment make an offer of X, an amount equal or less than $10 to the other player, the respondent. If the respondent accepts the offer, he will get X, and the proposer get 10 minus X. So the idea is, the experiment is that, let's say you will be given an offer of X or $10, but the point is you have to share part of that with someone else. And rationally speaking, you can offer someone else like 1 rupees or a half rupees, because if he or she accept that offer, both of you would get, like, you'll get 10 minus X. Let's say if you offer someone 1 rupees, that I'll give you 1 rupees, just without anything, just I'll give you 1 rupees. If he or she accept that, then you will get total 10, and 1 would be shared with this. So 10 minus 1. So you'll get 9. So if you look at the rational and selfish behavior, then the point is the people should accept anything, even because they are getting this thing. It's a kind of free lunch for them. They should accept 1 rupees, half a rupee as well. But when you do this kind of experiment even in lab setting, people are not going to accept less than, let's say, 20 or 30% of whatever they were offered. Let's say out of 10 rupees, if you offer someone 10 paisa or 50 paisa, they might reject the offer. But the point is, if they reject the offer, you don't get anything. So the idea is, in reality, rationally speaking, they should accept any offer above zero, let's say even 10 paisa or 20 paisa. But in reality, people maybe feel offended or humiliated or something like that. There are some psychological factors that people would not accept it. Maybe some people would accept it, but on average, because in research we look at on average, people would not accept it unless you pay them, as the experiment shows, unless you pay them around roughly 20%. If you pay them less than 20%, on average, they would reject the offer. So why they're rejecting it? They're getting something at least for nothing. But why they're doing it? Because there is some kind of underlying psychological factors. So people are not simply unbounded selfish, because unbounded selfishness means they should accept any amount, whichever is offered to them. Now, this is the basic fundamental, you can say, the difference between these areas, and how behavioral economics challenge these 3 notions of unbounded selfishness or willpower, these things. Now let's move forward and look at some of the people behind and their major ideas. Now, behavioral economics, in a sense, interestingly, was started by someone, Daniel Kahneman. He's still alive and professor at Princeton now. So he won a Nobel Prize in 2002. And that was a kind of big thing, because that was the, in a sense, first Nobel Prize which is given to the area of behavioral economics. Later on, as we'll discuss, there are actually 2 more Nobel Prizes after this were given primarily to behavioral economics, but this was the first one. And the most interesting thing was that this was given to someone who has never taken a course in economics. That's interesting. So he's a psychologist. He has never studied academically economics, but he was a cognitive psychologist looking at how people make decisions. And he was working, actually, he made the major contribution for which he won the prize. He has done that work with his fellow researcher in Israel, Amos Tversky, who unfortunately died as a rather young age in 1995. That's why he did not win the prize. Otherwise, he would be a joint winner with Kahneman. Now, Daniel Kahneman was like a psychologist. He worked for Israeli military as well as a psychologist. Later on, he was a professor there. He was looking at that how people make decisions under uncertainty. And he come up with this thing that when people are facing decision under uncertainty, they make systematic deviation from rational economic behavior. Initially, because he's never studied economics, so initially he did not realize that how economists conceptualize the human behavior. But when he talked with his economist colleague, and he was really surprised in a sense that they have a very naive conception of human behavior, that humans are going to behave, as we discussed in the previous slide, in that manner, because he was looking at the real human behavior, that how people are actually behaving under the uncertainty. And you can see most, if not all, the economic decisions in economic and finance are under the under uncertainty. Whether you have to invest, you start a project, it is under the uncertainty. It is about future. So there is an uncertainty in almost all the decision in economic and finance. But he was like really puzzled and surprised that economists assume that people behave in this particular way, what rational economic way. So he has done, of course, an extensive work. He built his whole career on this area of decision making under uncertainty. And he has written a very famous paper in Econometrica on this, which is later on was cited as one of the reasons for Nobel Prize. Now, in order to understand his key ideas, thankfully, he has written a popular book, which I'll show you at the end, Thinking Fast and Slow. Maybe some of you have already read that. It's a very famous best-selling book, in which he actually summarized his life work in an easy to understand way. So it was, in a sense, good for journal audience, non-economists, even non-psychologists, to understand the core ideas. So now we are going to discuss the main crux of his ideas, because he is like the giant in this field, and his contributions are extremely important. And even subsequently, other people has followed his lead, and they apply these ideas into other areas. We will see later on in the presentation. Now, in order to understand it, the complexity of human behavior, he divided the human behavior, how people behave generally, into this thing called system 1 and system 2. And it is quite intuitive and easy to understand. What is system 1? It is just a name for a system in which we operate automatically and quickly with little or no effort. So there is a biological aspect. For example, we are breathing, when we walk, we don't think about these things. So when we eat, we don't think about eating actually. That's at the biological level, the system 1 is working. So when we are breathing, eating, walking, most of these physical things which we are doing regularly, which is a normal thing, we don't need to think over it. So he believed there are things for which we don't need any kind of cognition. They're kind of a muscle memory, and people do it like, and there are many things in life in which we do, and we'll see lots of example in the next slide. But basically the idea is that these are things which people do automatically without thinking. So it's a thinking, in a sense, fast. So that's the title of book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So this is thinking fast. What about system 2? System 2 is like effortful mental activities, which demand complex computation. So here it is thinking slow. If you want to do those kind of activities, there you need to like slow down and try to understand those things. So I'll give you an example that would make it clear what are these systems. So let's look at system 1. For example, we can detect one object is more distant than other. So we don't use physics or some kind of physics equation and computation. When we see people or objects, we can realize quite intuitively, that's how our brain works. We can see which one of that is near and which is further. So you don't need any training. Kids or like little children can learn over the periods, and we learn this thing unconsciously. That's how brain evolved and do it. Orient to the source of sudden sound. Again, if there is a sudden sound of, let's say, unfortunate blast or something like that, so we don't think like, we just quickly see where the sound is coming. We are very, in a sense, smart in that sense. For example, completing the phrase bread and butter. So it's like very quick. Making a disgust face when shown a horrible picture. So if you're shown something, so you will make, you don't think that I'm going to make this kind of face. It is quite quick. Detect hostility in voice. This is remarkable. Even the most advanced artificial intelligence machines could not detect that. But when people talk with each other, people can detect these subtle views that if somebody is hostile or they are like kind or anything, it's really good. So we are very good in that. And we'll learn this thing over literally thousands of years. So literally thousands of years, or literally hundreds and thousands of years of practice give us this thing that we learn this thing. read words on large billboard, drive a car on an empty road, understanding simple sentences. Like if there is a simple sentence, so you don't need to put a lot of cognitive load there. Then this is tricky. This is focus on, this is system 2. Let's say you want to focus on a voice, a particular person in a crowded room. You cannot do it. Let's say there are 10 different people and they're talking and you want to focus on just a minute. So you want to focus on that particular voice. It's not easy. You have to focus. You have to put your ear there and try to detect that particular. Searching memory to identify a surprising sound. So let's say if there is a surprising sound, so the memory, you'll have to go back to the even smell and fragrance. So if you get a new kind of fragrance, so it will take you back to the memory line and you will try to connect it with something. So this is quite like if you are walking normally, that is system 1. You're just walking on normal speed. But if you walk faster than normal speed, then what is natural to you, you have to use your cognitive brain. You have to push yourself that I'm walking. Monitor the appropriateness of your behavior in social situation. So in a particular social situation, how you should behave, that need a kind of system to count the occurrence of letter A in a page of text. That is not easy. You have to count them one by one. Park in a narrow space. Normal driving on an empty road is like system 1. You don't think. And if you park in a narrow space, you have to focus, look right, left, and all those things, and then you compare. For example, compare 2 washing machines for overall value. It's not simple. You have to look at the data. You have to see all. If you want to compare 2 mobiles or washing machines on anything, filling out the tax form. Tax is really tricky, and lawyers makes money out of this, all the complexity in the tax system. So you cannot fill up the tax file without going into that. And checking the validity of a complex logical argument. If you use system 1 in these situations, that is going to create problem. And we'll talk about the problem in the next slide. What are the problems when you use system 1 instead of using system 2? And there is if you just later on, you can check out, this is a very famous experiment, Invisible Gorilla. So this is a famous psychological experiment. You can check out on YouTube as well. There's a video as well. So there is a room in which 2 teams are there, one in black color uniform and other in white, and they're playing basketball. And if you ask people that you have to count the number of passes made by team in black, so this is very tricky. You have to focus, you have to find out number of passes. And when they show this video to the participant, in middle of that video, somebody would come in and in the costume of gorilla, and they would start dancing in the middle of the video. And when they later on checked, most of the people could not see gorilla. Why? Because the brain was focused on counting that passes. So that's how the brain. This is system 2. Now the issue is there are many things, and this is the beauty of human brain, that many things which are initially system 2 can turn into system 1. And one thing I think all of you can relate easily. Look at the driving. When you were learning driving, so system 2 has this ability to change into 7. For example, when you're learning to drive, it was, all of you would remember, sometime when you learn driving, sometime you look at your feet when you're putting brakes, because that was system 2. You look at right, left, and you're too much anxious on how you're driving. That's fine once you're learning. But once you learn the driving, it become a kind of system 1. System 1 is like a muscle memory. So now when you're driving, whether you're driving a car or a cycle, later on, you don't think about driving actually. You just go on, and sometime even you change, you follow a particular route and you have to go somewhere else, but you will go to your usual destination because you are following. So you're even in case of any emergency on road, your brain is such an efficient allocation of the scarce cognitive resources that it will switch over you to the system 2. So let's say somebody comes up suddenly in front of car, you suddenly switch over to system 2 and you put up the brakes and you do it fine. So this is there is nothing wrong with the system 1 per se. System 1 is wonderful, but the problem arises that where we should use system 2 when we start using system 1, that is creating problem. So there is a division of labor. We look at Adam Smith. One of his key ideas was division of labor, which led to specialization and prosperity in simple words. So there is a division of labor in our brain as well. So brain is extremely, another way of looking at it, that human mind's brain, you can see in the slide, this is that human brain represents just 2% of the person's total body weight. So whatever is our body weight, it is roughly 2%, which is, by the way, highest in animal kingdom. So in animal kingdom, we have the biggest brain, not in absolute size, but on with respect to our weight, our brain is like 2%, which is huge. And evolutionary biologists even look at that and they say, why we need the bigger brain? Because bigger brain causes lots of problems during birth and other areas, but we have a bigger brain, and it accounts for 20% of body's energy use. So whatever the energy we take from our food, 20% of that goes only to the brain, which is just 2% of the body mass. So you can see our brain is an energy sucker. It just sucks the energy. That's why whenever you do mentally cognitive tasks, it drained you. So you need to take some kind of energy, some kind of sweetener in order to fresh up. So from an evolutionary biology point of view, everyone's brain is by default lazy. So we have a lazy brain. So in a sense, lazy brain, in a sense, brain would look at any new phenomena and try to convert it into system one. That's a good thing. So whenever you learn something new, it would be system two, because it sucks a lot of energy. So our biology would tell us, the brain would tell us, okay, just convert it into system one. Learn it from the like muscle memory. Once we learn it, like driving, then actually when we drive, our system two is sleeping actually. So in a sense, our brain, everyone's brain is lazy, and they want to rely on system one, which is quick. And there is nothing wrong in it. So it's a good thing. Like that's why there are many people who don't want to, because they have many important things to discuss. Like if you look at CEOs of the firms and the political leaders, even if you look at their dressing is very standardized. Like once I was listening, or rather reading an interview of President Obama with Michael Lewis in Vanity Fair. So he said that whenever I go, wake up, I don't want to use my brain to what to wear. So it's a standard practice. It's a white shirt or it's a blue or black suit. So it's like very standard. Why? Because he don't want to use his brain on deciding what to wear, because that requires system two. So you have to do. So he said that I have many more important things on my table to decide and to make sense of the complexity of the world and the decision that they are making. So that's why these people, they don't want to even think about what to wear, what kind of haircut, because they go for standard things so that they can use their scarce mental energy to something more productive. This is all good. No, what is the problem? The problem is that when we use system one, when we should have used system two, that is the problem. So although when you have to use system one, it's all like driving and other kind of thing. These are all good. But for example, when you're meeting with someone for the first time, now one easy lazy thinking is what we call stereotyping. This is one of the bias. We'll see bias in a minute. What is bias? Bias is when you're using system one, where you should have used system two, and that led to suboptimal decision. That led to some kind of bad decision. So suboptimal decision, we call them biases. Another fancy word for them is heuristic. Heuristics are mental shortcut. It's a mental shortcut. So let's take a simple example. When you're meeting with someone, one thing is based on, let's say, male or female, or based on ethnicity. Like if you're meeting with Punjabis or Sindhis or Balochi or Pakhtun or someone from India for that matter, someone from America. One thing is, what would system one do? System one would create, it has a folder in our brain about a particular kind of people, and it would fit that particular individual into that folder. So it's called stereotyping. So you would think all the Punjabis are like this, all the Pakhtuns are like that. It's an easy thing. It's a lazy thinking, and this is system one at work. And you make a generalization about their behavior, and you put them into a particular box. Now, what should be done in that case is system two, that you need to sit down and talk with them, and you have a kind of conversation. Then you get to know about their ideas, and maybe you can form an opinion about it. But what is lazy thinking, which we can see a lot online on social media? It's very easy, lazy thinking. Go for stereotype, make quick decision, and that is system one at working. Because system one does not require like a lot of thinking. It's easy. So this is system one and system two. Now, what is heuristic? Heuristic is a mental shortcut. that allow people to solve problems and make judgment quickly and efficiently. Again, no big deal. It's good thing. Heuristics are not bad. So you make quick decisions like in driving or in what you need to cook every day. So if you start making an Excel file and deciding what should be the calories in everything, that would be a complex decision. So you make a broader decision that will have vegetable 2 days and eat and all those. These are mental shortcuts. You don't want to go into those details, and that's all fine. These are called rule of thumb. Like these are broad rule of thumb, which allow people to make decisions which are like mental shortcuts, which are good. Now, the problem is heuristics are helpful in many situations, but they can lead to cognitive biases. Now, this is the issue. And this is Daniel Kahneman in his book list on a long list of biases. Again, we have a shortage of time. So I'll share with you a couple of them just to highlight the main idea. So what are the biases? These are basically heuristic or mental shortcut. When you use system 1, which is quick auto, instead of using system 2, and that would lead to certain kind of problem. Not always, but if that can lead to problem, that is called biases. Now let's start with, I have a list of few biases. So you can see here. Oh, now before that, you can see what are the rationale, why we are doing that. Why we're not analyzing computing and complexity of every decision in life? Because as I said, it is cognitively costly. Just think of it, we have a mental bandwidth, like broadband has a bandwidth. So we have a limited mental bandwidth. If we start analyzing each and everything in our decision, then it was like really difficult to make any decision. So our brain was evolved in a way to make quick decision based on heuristic or mental shortcut. So sometimes we don't have information, as we already has one lecture on asymmetric information, the role of information in economics. So economists assume that people have information. Now, if we just assume, although there are no perfect information, as we discussed earlier, this is the contribution of George Akerlof famous lemon problem. But even if, let's say, you have information to decide between option A, B, and C, the problem is, even first of all, you don't people normally don't have information. But let's assume even when they have information, that information they don't have a capacity to use that information. So you don't have that capacity, mental capacity, to comprehend and analyze and make an optimal decision. So what is the best shortcut? Use heuristic, use mental shortcut and make decision. So otherwise, even if there are information, sometimes information is too much. And this would lead to too much of, mental dissonance if you have too much of information and you cannot make sense of that information. You cannot prioritize different all kind of information. So our brain was evolved to make in all of these situations quick decisions. And many a times those quick decisions are fine. But when they are not fine, when they are problematic, those are called biases. Let's quickly look at some of the biases. So what is a biases? It is systematic error of judgment. What do you mean by systematic? It is not just random error, okay, just people make random error. It is systematic. If you present the same problem to people, they are going to make the same mistake again and again because they are following system 1 where they should have followed system 2. Now, one of the bias is very, I think, easy to understand and relate is confirmation bias. So whenever we look at new information, whether new information is about a company, about an economy, about politics, about any social idea, anything, whenever we take new information, if we already have a idea about that thing, so we will look at only those information which confirm our existing belief. For example, if you're supporting the current government or if you're in opposition, both of the cases, so you will look at all the information. If you're supporting the current government, you will look at all the information which they have done right, because everybody is doing something right, something wrong. So you'll pick out those things, and preferably you will avoid geo and watch ARY continuously to go for this confirmation bias, because you'll see government is doing wonderful. You look at only those, follow those people on Twitter, you look at only those WhatsApp group and all those things. And if you are in opposition, if you're anti-government, you will go mostly for those kind of information which negate and which highlight the problem with the government decision making in their policies. Now, this is the problem, because the idea is whenever you get new information, you should use system 2. What is system 2? Look at that argument, make your opinion based on evidence and facts. But what is easy? This is lazy thinking. What is easy? Go for confirmation bias. So open up Geo if you're in a position, or go to ARY if you're in government, and be happy and listen all the good things which you already have your own mind, and you think you are smart and you are efficient because look at all these people are also saying what I think. So this is again, this is a terrible thing for intellectual growth or knowledge acquisition, because you're only looking at those things which you already believe and support. So you follow only those people on social media who share your point of view. You're only reading those news. So this is confirmation bias. So again, this is system one at working. So brain is actually sleeping, and the cognitive part is, you're just looking at whatever confirm your behavior and you just go with that, go with the flow. Hindsight bias. This is another interesting human behavior. Hindsight is, as you know, is opposite of foresight. Foresight is looking in future. Hindsight is looking backward. No, when something happened, anything good or bad, we have this tendency that when we look back at that thing, we think we already know that. So this is so when we look back, we say, okay, I already knew this thing. This was my opinion. But in reality, that was not the case. But for our mind, it is very easy. For example, it is insisting that you know who is going to win PSL. So once the particular team won the match, later on you will come up with all kind of plausible, amazing explanation that I knew that their captain was good, their fielding was good. This is normally we are not everyone again. What I'm saying is not applicable to 100% of the population, but on average, people have this tendency that they believe whatever they believe. Afterwards, they try to adjust their belief. Even sometimes they don't realize. It's not they're doing it deliberately and they come up with stories. The idea is that human brain is such that it try to, and another something which we can relate, those people who are in finance or into finance, there is a thing very interesting. We don't have time to go into detail, but somebody can, if somebody is interested, they can explore that. There is a very interesting idea by Nicholas Nassim Taleb on black swan. Like basically his idea was that most of the important things in history are like black swan. So what is black swan? Swans are white. Like if you normally see swans are white, but a single black swan can challenge the accumulated knowledge of hundreds and thousands of years. When somebody discovered the first black swan somewhere in Australia, that single observation destroy actually the existing knowledge of thousands of years. The swans are white. So this is what in philosophy, what they call epistemology, this is philosophy of knowledge itself. That so he made this case. He's a trader, an investor, and writer. So he works in finance. His life. So he made this case. A single kind of event can actually have a huge implication, especially in financial market and economic life. The definition of a black swan is it is unpredictable, like nobody can predict it earlier. Secondly, it is consequential. And thirdly, which is relevant to our discussion, it is retrospectively predictable. What does that mean? Once that event happened, people would say, oh, I already know this would have happened. So this is our mental tendency, and this gives us overconfidence. This has led to another bias that people on average are overconfident about their knowledge, abilities, and expertise. So when we have this hindsight bias, we think, okay, like I already know that market is going to collapse. But before that, if you follow the news, very few people would have that idea. That markets are going down, but once they go down, people will come up all kind of explanation. And in another concept in philosophy, what they call narrative fallacy. So human mind has this idea that we concoct stories, and we are very good in stories. We love stories. Stories are wonderful, but the problem is once something happened randomly, we create a story which looks very causal and very logical, and which shows that we can predict it. But in reality, that is not the case. So let's quickly go through some of anchoring bias. This is another interesting bias. Anchoring, like it is like anchor, how you anchor the ship in the sea. So this is our bias. When we face something which we don't know any idea, so our brain would look up for anchor. And that's why during the negotiation, and in our case, when you go and buy something, people like anything, people would come up with a initial number. So with the initial number, most of people get anchored with that. That means anchored means they would adjust their ranking. Let me give you an example. There is very interesting example here that there is a study somebody done in New York. And they ask the people that just write down, don't show us, just write down the last 4 digits of your social security number or NIC number. And these are random numbers. So these are now, somebody would come up 4579, somebody would come up 1249. These are just random numbers. And you ask them question for which they don't know the answer. For example, how many dentists are there in New York? So of course, if they are dentists, they know the data. So the experiment would not work. So we are deliberately looking for people who don't know the answer. So now, if you ask them, give us some number. So research indicate that when they give the number, which is just a number which they don't know, but they make a guess, an educated guess, it turns out that their guess was connected with their last 4 digits of CNIC. What is that? It is really absurd. There is no connection between last 4 digit of your CNIC number and the number of dentists in Punjab. There is no connection. But because human mind is such that if you ask people to write down the last 4 digits, and if they don't know the answer, they will, they will anchor. This is called anchoring. They will anchor there. Another interesting study done in this area was on real estate agents. So real estate agents, and this is applicable on experts, like real estate agents are expert. And unlike in Pakistan, in US, where they have done this study, real estate agents are like, they have some kind of diploma, they have these realtors, they have some kind of knowledge as well. So they are not just random dude who come up and say they're like property agents, like in our case. So the study was very interesting, and they selected property, and they invited 2 groups of these agents, real estate agents, 2 groups. And they visit that particular premises, and they look at the house and neighborhood and all that. And they ask them that just tell us what is the fair value. But just before leaving, just randomly says that the house next door was sold for, hypothetically, for 5 crore rupees. Just randomly you say the house next door were road. And another group, which is again an expert and real estate agent, but the only difference was they also see the house, check out the house and neighborhood and everything. And you just ask them that the house next door was sold for 6 crore. Just these are the 2 different things. When they look at the data, and when they ask these agents to individually give you the fair value of that property, it turns out that the first group was anchored at 5 crore. So what does that mean? The first group would give you the value which is close to 50 million. They would say 48 million, 52 million, 53 on average. And the second group, which for you have said them 60 crore or 60 million, they would give you the value which is close to 60 million. Now, what does that show? This precisely tells us that people are easily anchored, and even experts are anchored. And they are even looking at, when they look at that any information, they're anchored very easily. And then there is a hyperbolic discounting. Tendency of people to place much greater importance on the immediate present than even the near future when making an economic decision. But when we look at the rational economic agent, which we have in traditional economics, we believe that that person who is going to look at what are the, like time value of money, one of the basic concepts in finance, we study that the value of money changes over time because of inflation and other things. And when people make decisions, they look at the time element as well. But in reality, people actually, they do hyperbolic discounting. They ignore the future and they give too much value on the present, which is sometimes not good for them, of course, because something could be valuable in your future, but they ignore that. This is highly, you can say, irrational behavior, but people are doing it. They are prone. This is also called present bias. People have this bias towards present. And then on this list of biases is this prospect theory, which is again given by Daniel Kahneman, who won the prize for one of this contribution. And it's like, in summary, there is their idea, which is very easy to understand, but economists simply ignore that, in a sense, that let's see, if you get on a trade, you were investing in stock market or property or anything, you make $1 million. Let's say you make $1 million over, let's say, 6 months. No, it would give you what economists call certain kind of utility. So like certain kind of pleasure, satisfaction, whatever you call it. So it gives you, let's put some number. Those numbers are, let's say, 10 units, hypothetically. 10 units is your utility or the benefit. We just put some number on it for 1 million rupees of profit. Now, what would happen if you lost 1 million? What do you think? What would happen if you lost equal amount? Like you make 1 million, you get 10 units of satisfaction for simplicity. What would happen if you lost 1 million? What do you think? What would be, if we put some number, what would be the pain or displeasure of losing 1 million? What would be, anyone? If you make 1 million, you get, let's say, 10 units of pleasure. Just again, to simplify the example, 10 units. What would if you lost 1 million? So how much pain or displeasure you would have? Anyone? I cannot see anyone else. So Hira, I can only see you. So what do you think?
It will be a lot more than we have gained.
Oh.
Multiplying the cost we have gained, we'll have a loss of those things because, yeah.
Okay, so the next Nobel Prize is for you because this is their insight for which they won the Nobel Prize. So you are the future Nobel Prize winner. Yes, this is quite common and we understand, but in economics, we assume that the losses and gains are symmetrical. That means if you make 10 rupees, you get certain player. If you lose 10 rupees, the displeasure or pain is equal to the gain. But as you said, this is not the case. In reality, the 10 rupees of 1 million or 10 rupees of winning will give you a player, but losing 10 rupees would have a more effect on that. So this is what we call losses loom larger than gain. So this results into what we call loss aversion. People want to avoid the loss, and that is creating another kind of problem. Let me give you another example from the stock market easily. Let's say if you put money into a stock for 50 rupees, that is the current value, and based on your analysis, you say that if the price goes up to 54, I would sell it. Okay, so that's your analysis based on that. If price goes to 54, I will sell it. And then you say if the price goes down to, hypothetically, let's say 47, I should sell it. That's before the trade. You have done all the computation and everything. Now, in reality, what happened, people have done this kind of studies and they look at the trading data of the investor. It turns out when price goes up to 53 and 54, investor would sell it. Yes, they would sell it. Why? Because they'll make money. No? They'll make 4 rupees on a trade, and that would give them a pleasure and satisfaction. But the trick is when the price goes down to 48, 47, rationally speaking, you should have sold it at 47 because you have decided earlier, but it turns out people would not sell it at 47. Why they are not selling it? Because they want to avoid the loss. The price could go back to 50, but there is a chance the price could go to 46, 45, 44. So it could be a really problematic case. So the researcher looking at the portfolio of individual, they actually look at it and they come up with this thing, what is called disposition effect, that people are going to sell the winning stock. Winning stock means the stock would go up, they would sell it quickly in order to make money. But they would not sell the loss-making stock because in order to avoid the pain, because unless you sell the stock, you don't book the loss accounting. In accounting, you don't book the loss. So at least you believe, okay, now the price might go up back from 47 to 48. So you wait. Yes, price can go up. That is one option, but it is also possible the price would go down as well. 45, 44, 43. So it turns out by looking at this data that people eventually have a loss-making portfolio because all the good stocks, they sell them quickly, and all the bad stock, they are not selling it. And this is from a rational point of view, this should not be the case because 3 rupees of loss and 3 rupees of gain from a rational point of view are equal, but that's not the case in reality. So this is what prospect theory in a very simplistic version is. So okay, next is now moving beyond the biases. Now we know what are the biases. So let's look at, this is another important idea, and I'll share you the book, another thing in the end. This is by Richard Thaler. Richard Thaler, again, he was the another candidate. He won the Nobel Prize as well, somewhere, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 or you can check it online. So they come up with this, they applied the insight from Daniel Kahneman, and they come up with this idea of nudge. And this is again a best-selling book by Richard Thaler with Harvard legal scholar Case Gunstein. And the idea of nudge is that because the people are not fully rational, as we have just established, so what we can do if we want to nudge people toward the right kind of decision, so what we can do is we can change the choice architecture. The idea is that instead of that government make something compulsory and you should do this or not, that's not the idea. The idea is to present things in a way that can change the behavior in a positive way. That can change the behavior in a positive way. So they have written this book called Nudge. And this is also called liberal paternalism, the kind of thing that government is working as a paternalistic kind of government, but they're not like pushing people, you have to do this or that. Rather, they give option in such a way that people make right kind of choices. So let me share you with some example, which are very interesting and insightful, and they have a policy implication. For example, people don't save for retirement as they should have, like on average, and they are consuming major chunk of their income and they're not saving enough. So this was a big problem, and again everywhere. And this study was done in US. So Richard Thaler come up with this thing called Save More for Tomorrow. They come up with this plan. The idea was that when you join a job, for example, when you're joining letter, so in that letter, we can add up this option that whenever your salary goes up, right now, for example, if your salary is 80,000 rupees, let's say out of that, 10% of that, which is 8,000, is deducted every month for your retirement plans. That could be private pension plan, like in US, what they call 401k plan, or it could be like in our case, government has other kind, but in case of one private, let's say you deduct 8,000 rupees, which is 10% of your income every month and goes into retirement plan. But in reality, what would happen when people income increases, they don't increase the contribution as much as they should have. No, they want to save. But the point is, because we are not that rational creature that we have just discussed, our behavior is very tricky, and we don't make those kind of decisions. So what you can do is that when people join their the particular job, in their joining report, for example, you put up this option, just one option in writing, that whenever when your salary goes up, by default, your contribution would go up. If you just click it, you don't have to do, you just click it, and then automatically it would happen. So when they apply this thing in real setting, and they have done this experiment in real setting, it turns out that saving has gone up. So the point is, humans are very flimsy in terms of decisions. So if you present them something, they might click it. Another interesting example was this organ donation. Like people are dying because of lack of organs, like kidney and other things. On the other hand, people are dying on road accident and other things. But nobody wants to think about death, especially their own death. And people are very rarely going to write down that when I die, give these organs to in donation. So what they have done in the US, they have done this another study, that when you go for a driving license renewal, which you have to go after a certain period of time, when you renew that, you have to sign up some form. In that form, there is an option that in case of any death in accident or anything, you allow your organs to be donated. Now, it turns out if you just put this option, not everyone, but there is a significant portion of people who are just going to click it, and the organ donation goes up. Another interesting example, which they applied in US government, that US government, all the departments of US government, and many people like our participants are also government employee here, they can realize there are literally thousands of pages of print going on in if you look at all the ministries, all the government department, there are thousands of print. And of course, you need to take those print in order to read them. So they add a small nudge there. When you give an option Control P for printer, there would be a pop-up. The pop-up would say, would you like to take print on back-to-back pages? And most of the time you take it, unless there is something like specific. Most of the time it doesn't make. So when you click OK, the printer would automatically make it 2 seconds. These are very small kind of nudges. These are not something that require a lot of money and resources. You can do, and it turns out that they do. And same is the case on tax and other government fees. It turns out that if you remind people, just send them a small text message, even that can happen. Now, this theoretical, this is not only theoretical, there are deep policy implications. And conservative government of David Cameron in 2010, they've created a nudge unit under the influence of Richard Taylor and Kay Sunstein. They were their advisor. Under the cabinet office, they have created behavioral insight team, and that is famously called as the nudge. So in that case, basically, the idea of that nudge unit was that to apply the insight from psychology and this behavioral economics into policymaking. Later on in 2014, they spin off that firm, and now it is a public limited company, which is partly owned by employee and partly owned by cabinet office as well. So, and now there are literally dozens of governments across the world. They have set up these kind of behavioral insight team or nudge units in order to apply the insights of these things. And of course, there are many people who criticize that these things would be only incremental change. They cannot do the kind of structural change that we need in the economy. But nevertheless, by looking at vulnerabilities of human behavior, you can nudge them. And secondly, something which we all are very familiar, the people in marketing are continuously doing that. So they know from the day one that people are not rational. They come up with this scheme of buy one, get one, and all kind of crazy sales and everything. All of those things are actually targeting and nudging us to do something, which is good for them maybe, and maybe not good for us. But the point is, people in marketing, they know much more about the role of psychology than economists generally, because they realize, because if people are rational, maybe there is no justification for marketing and advertisement. So people know what is good and what is bad. And even if you look at the marketing and their schemes, whenever, for example, they sell these kind of brand luxury cars like Mercedes and BMW, in none of their ads, they would show you that it's the safest car in the world, it's the most efficient car. They would show you that you are successful, you made money, you deserve this. So the idea is to look at and target not the rational part of your brain, but that other part of the brain which push you that because now I made money, I'm successful, I have to tell people and show them in a way with the car I drive, whether it's BMW or other. So marketing people are really smart in a sense that they know that we are not rational. Now I think we are much behind the schedule, but quickly, the last point, then I'll finish it. That although we have a whole lecture on development economics, but even there is a implication of what we call behavioral development economics. So this is a really interesting insight from Sandil Muruganathan. He's now at Chicago, previously at Harvard. He's one of the rising star of the field. So he wrote a book called Scarcity, in which he actually kind of think that poor people, those who are poor, and when they have, because they have scarcity of resources, even rich people has scarcity of time at least, but let's talk about poor people because they have real scarcity of resources. So when people are constantly thinking about the next meal, when they're constantly thinking about whether they're able to pay the fees of their kids or not, their cognitive bandwidth is used in all of those things. And then they're going to make decisions which are bad for them even. So they have done a very interesting, clever experiment in Tamil Nadu in India. He's basically from Tamil Nadu, originally born there in there, but now of course based in States. So they have done a simple experiment. There were farmers, small subsistence farmers. These are actually poor farmer, but they were growing sugarcane. And twice a year, they get a kind of cash flows. So twice a year, they get a cash, and then that cash goes down, and then after 6 months, they cash paid. So in a sense, twice a year, they have money, and then they don't have money. So it's very clear. So before the harvest, they don't have money, but once the harvest is there, they have money. So this is a kind of very interesting natural experiment. So what he has done along with other researchers, and this is published in Science, one of the leading journals, that what they have done, they conducted a simple IQ test. So IQ tests have their own problems, but just looking at simple computational test, and they give this test before they receive the cash and the same test after they receive the cash. It turns out When they don't have cash, their IQ drops significantly. No, that does not the poor people are stupid or they don't have a lower IQ. The idea is when they are shortage of cash, there is a scarcity, their mind is constantly thinking about the next meal, how to pay the tuition fees and other things. So their mind is in a sense cognitively stuck there, and they are their IQ would drop. And that's why they are more likely to make decisions which are bad for them. On the other hand, when the same people, so genetically, they are not like inferior. When the same people, when they have cash, their IQ would actually goes up. So this is the point is, it is very important from a policy perspective that when you make these kind of complex forms for the poor in order to receive some kind of government assistance, even they could not even fulfill those things because their cognition is stuck up in something. And psychologists call this thing cognitive depletion. So there is cognitive depletion. So cognition is not something unlimited, and so it's depleting over the period of time. So this is the problem with that. So now we are at the end. So let me share with you some of the works from where I have taken this. The first is, I would recommend all of you, those who have not read, this is very easy to understand, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. As you can see, winner of Nobel Prize, a New York Times bestseller, and so on. So this is all the biases in more detail. We have touched few of them. Second is Misbehaving. This is again by Richard Thaler, the guy behind this Nudge, and he is also the Nobel Prize winner. So he talked about the historical development of behavioral economics. So this is the making. The third is Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis is one of the finest nonfiction writer, I think. If somebody is interested in economics and finance, he is the person to go for. He's currently the contributing editor at Vanity Fair, but previously he wrote for New York Times and New Yorker as well. So he's a very fine writer and one of the highest paid writer actually. So he wrote many books on finance and markets, but this book is called The Undoing Project. This is the friendship and the work of Daniel Kahneman and his friend who died, Amos Tversky. So this is a kind of another intellectual history of their joint product. Because as I said earlier, Tversky would have won the prize. And then next is, this is by Sandil Mullainathan and Aldous Sheffer. So this is again, a very, we don't have time to go into that, but this is really key insight that how scarcity, and it's not about money, even time scarcity. The people who are time scarce, they are going to make decisions which are suboptimal. So people who are extremely busy, they are too much on their plate, they could not make right kind of decision. So, but of course, money is more obvious. Nudge is again Richard Thaler and Kay Sunstein. Kay Sunstein is basically a legal scholar, but he writes too much. It's difficult to follow him. He writes, I think, after every couple of months, he writes another book. So he's a very prolific writer. And then finally, World Development Report, which is a flagship report by World Bank. Every year, they select a particular topic. In 2015, yes, they have this thing called Mind, Society, and Behavior. So this is a really interesting report which look at the behavioral element into the policy world. So this is the end of the presentation, and that's it from my side. If you have any question, comment, we still have 15 minutes. I have taken too much time, but I will still have 15 minutes. So if you have any question, not only question, comment, and insight based on your own work or job, how you can see and how the ideas of psychology are important and influence in your particular domain as well. So that's it from my side.
I think, sir, now people must having a malfunction process within them after reading a lot about behavior sciences. So wait up, ask some questions according to that, but I think it was
Sorry, Hira, we cannot hear you. So maybe there is some issue on your end. It's not. So anyone who want to like comment or share or anything related to these readings, if you have read any of this thing and you want to share, because there are many things which I have of course skipped because there is a lot of content, but I want to just give you a flavor of major ideas and people behind that. So specifically these reference books, if some, and these are for general public, these are non-technical, you don't need a PhD in economics or psychology to read them. It's very simple and anybody can read and understand them.
Can
So
you hear me now? I think there was no
yes,
mic
yes,
issue.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
Afan, you want to say something?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
No, you can talk first and I can talk.
Nani, I'm the TA.
So,
I respect the participants.
actually, I want to ask Sir Vikas. I'm interested more in the reading of the nudge, and I have some little bit reading about the nudge as well. But I am interested in that how the research methods is basically dealing in the lab experiments. If you have some insights and have some literature regarding lab experiments, that how the lab experiments are conducted and what protocols need to be followed. So I would like to read that part.
So this is under the experimental economics frame that okay, can you just, I think, mute it because, okay. So basically, yes, in lab experiment, like some of these are just bringing people in and asking them these simple questions. When you look at this, especially thinking fast and slow, for, as I said, for which they got the Nobel Prize and very key insight, all of these research are based on certain question, very simple to understand question. They have designed a very clever kind of questionnaire. And when you answer those questions, it highlight the systematic error in judgment. So if you read that thinking fast and slow, it would give you insight about their research method, which is based on questionnaire. On the other hand, in nudge, there are many observational studies. Like they have done these kind of studies based on observation, and they make a certain kind of intervention. Like as I said, they make this intervention of changing the default option. So they look at the data that how many organ donations was going on before the intervention. So on, of course, there is an organ shortage. Then they introduce this intervention in that form, that if you click that form that I'm willing to give my organs, so that, and there is a statistically significance difference. That's how in research methodology they try to quantify this thing, and so that's how they do it. So it is observational as well. You just observe a situation, then you nudge people to do certain things, like changing the default option and other. And then you look at the data pre and post, what happened before that and after the intervention. If there is no significant difference, then of course the nudge would not work in that case. But if there is a significant difference in behavior and outcome, then that means it is there. So okay, now there is, let me see the chat, if there is anything.
Yes, there's one question by Sufyan
Uh,
of how to overcome these biases in real-time settings.
No, this is like at the preface of Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman said that when I write this book, people think that I transcended the bias. That's not the case. The point is, even after reading these bias, that does not mean you overcome them. He come up this thing that once you realize, once you add, like today, from today's session, if you add into your vocabulary system 1 and system 2 in your vocabulary, and whenever you make any decision, whenever you make judgments about ideas, things, always think whether you're using system 1 or 2. So this is a kind of a break, in a sense, give you a pause. And it's a slow process. It's not like something. The first thing is to realize that how our thinking is systematically sometimes flawed. So we make like confirmation bias, which is, I think, easy to understand. We look at only those things, we read only those people, we follow those news which confirm the existing. So if you want to avoid that, look for counter evidence, look for the counter evidence, and then you make a point. Again, it is cognitively costly, and our brain would tell us, don't do it, just sleep and follow the system 1. But over the periods, once we realize that these are the biases, And we can, over the period, if we try to overcome them, of course, I think it's very difficult to go and transcend beyond the biases, but at least what we can do, we can reduce them. We can, reduce significantly if we realize, first of all, that our thinking has systematic problems. And sometimes even we don't realize, and we make generalized comments and generalized observation. So that's what we can do. Wajiha want to say something. So yes, over to you.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. First of all, it was a very thank you.
No, I cannot hear you.
Can
I just,
you hear me?
yes, now.
Okay. Thank you for that. Secondly, I want to ask, if you understand private conscious behavior, and often we see ATM
So sorry, Wajiha. Unfortunately, I could not hear you. You can put it into the chat box.
Yeah, I'll put
Because there was, okay.
no issue. No issue.
So if we have any other comment or question on this.
Well, I think so. It was one of the interesting sessions and makes me malfunction to ask a question because now I'm thinking what I'm asking is making sense or not to those things. But yeah, of course, Sapan talked about the nudge factor, but I don't understand when we talk about this consciousness when it comes to decision making and how we are presenting. Because sometimes what I see when people are doing something right, but because they're conscious and they're like, okay, we have to recheck it because this is what society have installed in us, that makes us very in that dilemma of doing things very difficultly. And yeah, I hope that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I'm also in those process. Yeah.
Yeah, the point is, I think what we can learn from that, we look at, because whenever we need decisions or do things, we follow a certain kind of mental models. So at least we realize what are the vulnerabilities. And this is what makes us human. There is nothing wrong in it that we follow mental shortcuts and heuristic. As I said, per se, there is nothing wrong. If we just imagine before eating anything or breathing anything, we start thinking about it and we try to calculate the pros and cons, we would not survive. We would actually, the brain would burst from that too much of load. So heuristic and shortcuts are not bad. They're all good. But the point is, we have to understand that when they lead to a stray, for example, look at the stereotype bias. Whenever we meet someone, so it's very easy to judge them based on few evidence. And this is what system one at work. So if we focus on system two and we try to, resist, jumping towards conclusion and focus on and think of and be more reflective, I think that's fine instead of jumping. So I think Vijaya has a question. Let me see it here. So it was moreover in nudges in instilling climate conscious behavior. I have observed that we get this at ATM when we get this, that do you want to print? Oh, yes. This is again a real life example of actually nudge. So when you go to an ATM machine and when they ask you to, you want to have a receipt or go green. So again, it's very simple. Again, if they don't put this option and the receipt is coming up by default, you just slightly change these things. Let me show you another example, like they have done, and they have shared in US, and this is a global problem, but again, more in developed countries. This is obesity problem, and especially school children are overweight. And this is a big problem, and health officials are clearly, and the science is well established that overeating, especially over intake of sugar, is bad. Now, in a school, they want to reduce that. Now, one way is to give lecture to the kids that this is not healthy, you should go green and eat vegetable and other things. Of course, that would not work out. Now, what they have done in that particular school, first they observe how how kids are doing, what they are eating during the break. So they realize when they go during the break into the cafeteria, they go to the cafeteria and they are a big like kind of container in which they put up fries, they put up burger and pizzas and all kind of junk food and carbonated drinks, and they take it there. And because these are cheap, economically they are not costly, so these are cheap food, especially in those countries. So they're taking too much of these junk food. Now, how to solve that? One of the things that they have done in that school was not giving any lecture, not giving any reminder. They just simply replace that tray. They just replace, they get rid of that tray. So there is no tray. So when the kid goes to buy anything, so they go and they, again, the money is not the issue. They go and pay and they buy, for example, burger or, something like cold drink. And now the issue is you created a friction, because if they want to buy more, they have to go to the table, they have to put those things there, come back and take fries and pizza. Now, and it turns out by just replacing the tray, the junk food intake has gone down actually. So this is a kind of nudge that you have not given any lecture, not any kind of regulation that kids should not drink that or this. You simply, what they call choice architecture, you simply change the setting, and children, without realizing that they are reducing their junk food intake, they have reduced their junk food intake and they go back. And so this is it.
I have another question to ask, if I can.
Yes, this is okay. Soft copies. I'll send it to Hira. So this is the okay. We have last 2 minutes. So okay, last question before we leave.
Well, I see that this course has been designed with all the type of economical thought we have learned, and today we have learned about behavioral economics. So this is off the topic question, but I wanted to understand why in my university I never been taught about these courses, and I know some other public universities where we haven't been reached to understand about behavioral economics. So what do you think? How important it is for everyone to learn about behavioral economics in today's world, when we have issues through the mental health and people who do not understand the decision making process, and the world is fast, you need to just one click with one decision.
So yes, I think not only behavioral economics, generally I think psychology is really interesting and informative as well. So we can push for some kind of adding more content from psychology into these areas. So I think psychology is going to, and in behavioral economics is partly psychology. So psychology, learning from psychologists is in a sense good way. And although behavioral change is a separate game, so I cannot say that by reading these books and these things, people can change their behavior, because behavior changing is tricky. But nevertheless, realizing the problems within our, emotions, the role of emotions, cognition, and other things, so that would be fine. So generally, one good way is to read these books. But again, that would not maybe complete change the behavior, but at least give us new insight about the human behavior, and that we can at least partly apply in our own life, and something also in the policy circle. So that's it, I think, good enough for today. So
Yes.
if you have any question or queries, you can again send email, and I'll send you this soft copy. I'll send to Hira so she can share it with you. So that's it from my side.
Thank you so much,
Allah
sir.
Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.